This encyclical comes at a critical moment in human history. The ecological crisis is essentially a spiritual problem. The sin against the environment, the ecological sin.
This is big for the Pope. Consume less and buy less. We have to really rethink our lifestyles.
He blames a lot of it on society's throwaway culture.
He tweeted out that the Earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth.
Immense pile of filth.
Pile of filth.
The encyclical Praise Be is the most important papal document ever on the environment, backing the science on climate change, blaming free markets, holding rich nations responsible. Environmentalists and many on the left are cheering the message.
The encyclical is very clear that it does not believe that market mechanisms are going to get us there.
And it's put conservative Catholics like U.S. presidential hopeful Jeb Bush in a tough spot.
I don't get economic policy from my bishops or my cardinals or from my pope.
Since the Argentinian archbishop became pope, Francis has shifted the focus away from the church's conservative stance on things like abortion and made attacks on inequality and the excesses of capitalism central.
He is launching a broadside on many of the things that we take as commonplace.
For some, it's like Occupy Wall Street took over the Vatican.
This is just pure Marxism coming out of the mouth of the Pope.
He has a Marxist background.
By the standards of how South Americans talk about capitalism, he's not radical at all. By the standards of how North Americans talk about it, yeah, he sounds like, Naomi Klein on speed, really.
For Jim Farney, a professor specializing in the intersection of politics and religion, it's not just the message, it's the messenger.
It was a very interesting choice this year. He really, though, stood out to us as someone who has changed the tone and the perception and the focus of one of the world's largest institutions.
Pope Francis has graced magazine covers, attained the glow of celebrity, giving him reach far beyond his flock of 1.2 billion Catholics.
He's a pretty active Twitter user. He's very good with a soundbite. He seems very comfortable around media, and he really seems to have taken it upon himself to use those avenues in a way that previous popes haven't.
The Pope's encyclical blasted previous climate summits for being hijacked by special interests. He'll want world leaders to carry that criticism to the summit in Paris this December.
It would be interesting to know how the conversations he seems to be having with political leaders have gone. What happened in the 10 minutes he had with Mr. Harper last week.
But for a global economy that runs on fossil fuels, the Pope's environmental message is radical.
What he's asking, especially the developed West, to do would be an extraordinary change. Everybody's going to take a large pay cut. Anybody over the middle class is going to see very significant tax increases. The set of public policies he's asking for, it's asking a lot of politicians to go to voters and say, this is what I'm going to do.
On paper, encyclicals are Catholic marching orders, but not in practice. The 1968 ban on contraception isn't exactly followed religiously. Still, on an issue where activists meet apathy, the world's scientists are doubted, and global institutions ignored, a rock star radical from the Vatican at least gets attention.
Who else could or would say this sort of thing and get more traction? Maybe he doesn't get much, but there's not many people that can speak or seem to speak with his type of moral authority. If there is going to be a message on this simply put out there in very bold terms, it's difficult to imagine it coming from anywhere else.
You're on a very important mission here to Europe. Can you tell us why is it important to include a visit with the Pope during your visit to Europe to talk about climate change?
Well, the Pope is one of the great voices of reason and compelling moral authority on the subject of the climate crisis. He's been ahead of the curve. He's been a leader. His encyclical Laudato Si is really a very, very powerful document, eloquent and morally very persuasive. And I think that his voice will be a very important voice leading up to and through the Glasgow conference, which I believe he intends to, hopefully intends to attend.
President Joe Biden is only the second Catholic president after JFK, and therefore he's just the second Catholic president to have an audience with the Pope. That, of course, is true, but it also simplifies it too much. It fails to capture how much the world has changed since Kennedy visited the Vatican 6 decades ago. In a great many ways, President Biden's Catholicism is much less of a fraught political issue than when Kennedy was in office. Yes, there are definitely still those on the far right who question Biden's faith, who think he's not really a Catholic, or there's something they should be questioning about his Catholicism. But nobody is really even debating anymore whether or not the Pope is secretly pulling the strings when it comes to how the U.S. is governed. For his part, President Biden has not had to tiptoe around the fact that he's Catholic. He regularly attends Mass. He's met with 3 different popes over the course of his political career. In fact, he's apparently felt so comfortable with all the various pontiffs that he famously told Pope Francis's predecessor, Pope Benedict, to his face that he was being, quote, entirely too hard on the American nuns. After the Vatican, under Pope Benedict, criticized various female religious orders for their activism when it came to issues like poverty. You have to be comfortable enough with the Pope to tell him, hey, Mr. Infallible, I got a bone to pick with you. So today's visit was not particularly fraught for President Biden, particularly because he has met with this Pope. He's met with Pope Francis numerous times in the past. He even keeps a picture of one of their past meetings in the Oval Office. It's probably therefore no surprise that by all accounts today's visit went well. The two held a private meeting for close to 90 minutes. That's triple the length of the meeting that President Trump held with Pope Francis when he visited back in 2017. Aside from just looking genuinely happy to be there, you could tell that President Biden had been looking forward to this visit for some time. But something else took center stage during their meeting, something that wouldn't have been a focus 60 years ago and is now very much top of mind. The two apparently devoted much of their conversation today to the climate crisis, the need and the moral responsibility that they both believe in terms of tackling that issue head on.